The summer sun hung high over the Arizona territory, turning the desert into a sea of shimmering heat. Waves of hot air danced above the sand, making distant mountains appear like ghosts on the horizon. Every breath tasted of dust, and every step stirred clouds of fine red earth that clung to boots and clothing. In this unforgiving land, survival depended on preparation, courage, and trust. Lose any one of those, and the desert would show no mercy. Clara Whitmore adjusted the brim of her faded hat as she guided her horse along a narrow trail between towering saguaro cacti. At 24 years old, she had never imagined leaving the green hills of Missouri behind, but life had offered her few choices after her father's passing. Alone in the world and burdened with debt, she had accepted what seemed like a miracle when she met Elias Mercer. Elias was a well-dressed businessman with polished boots, confident manners, and a voice that made every promise sound certain. He claimed to be a successful prospector searching for valuable mineral deposits across the Southwest. More importantly, he spoke of a future that included Clara. He promised they would marry once his latest expedition was complete, settle on a beautiful ranch, and never worry about money again. For months, Clara had believed every word. As they traveled together across the desert, Elias often spoke of the fortune waiting just beyond the next ridge. He described veins of gold hidden beneath forgotten canyons, places where few men had ever ventured. Clara listened with hope, imagining the peaceful life they would build together once his dreams became reality. "You'll never regret coming with me," Elias said one evening as they camped beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. "When this journey is over, we'll have everything we've ever wanted." Clara smiled softly. "I don't care about riches," she replied. "As long as we have an honest life together, that's enough for me." Elias returned her smile, but his eyes drifted toward the weathered map resting beside the campfire. The map fascinated him more than any conversation. Every line, every marking, represented wealth beyond imagination. Over the following days, the terrain grew harsher. Water became scarce, and even the horses struggled beneath the relentless heat. Clara noticed subtle changes in Elias. He became quieter, more impatient, and increasingly secretive. At night, he studied the map alone, refusing to answer questions about where they were heading. Late one afternoon, they entered a narrow canyon unlike any they had seen before. Massive stone walls rose around them, shielding the floor from the worst of the desert wind. Sunlight reflected from strange patches of yellow rock embedded in the cliffs. Elias suddenly froze. His eyes widened. He jumped from his horse and rushed toward one of the exposed rock faces. Digging into the stone with his pickaxe, he chipped away several pieces before holding them toward the sunlight. Gold. Real gold. His breathing quickened with excitement. "We found it," he whispered. Then louder, almost laughing, "We actually found it." Clara hurried over, surprised by his reaction. "Is it really what you hoped for?" "It's more than I hoped for," Elias answered, unable to hide his excitement. "This vein could make a man richer than he ever imagined." Clara hugged him. "I'm happy for us." Those simple words barely reached his ears. Instead of seeing the woman who had trusted him through months of hardship, Elias saw something else. A witness. Someone who knew exactly where the gold was hidden. Someone who could claim part of the fortune. Someone who might tell others. That evening, they camped near the canyon entrance. Clara noticed Elias barely touched his supper. He stared into the fire, his face illuminated by flickering orange light while thoughts raced behind his calm expression. Sleep refused to come easily. Long after Clara had closed her eyes, Elias remained awake. Greed had begun whispering dangerous ideas. "If no one else knows," he thought, "then every ounce belongs to me." Before dawn, he quietly packed the supplies. Every water canteen. Most of the food. Both rifles. He saddled the strongest horse while leaving Clara's exhausted mount tied near the camp. As the first rays of sunlight stretched across the canyon walls, Clara awoke to the sound of hooves. "Elias?" She sat upright, confused. He stood several yards away holding the reins of both healthy horses. "What are you doing?" His face showed none of the warmth she had once known. "I'm leaving." She laughed nervously. "Very funny. Help me pack." "I'm not joking." The smile disappeared from Clara's face. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said." He reached into his pocket and tossed a nearly empty canteen onto the ground before her. "It should last a few hours if you're careful." Fear spread across her face. "Elias, this isn't funny." "No. It isn't." She stood and hurried toward him. "You can't leave me here." "I can. You promised we'd build a life together." "I promised many things." His cold words struck harder than the desert wind. "You know where the gold is," he continued. "That's a problem." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as the truth finally settled over her. "This is about the mine. It's about everything." She reached for his arm. "I would never betray you." "I can't afford to believe that." "Elias, please." For a brief moment, hesitation crossed his face. Then greed crushed what little conscience remained. Without another word, he turned his horse toward the open desert. Clara ran after him. "Elias. Please. Don't do this." Her desperate cries echoed against the canyon walls. He never looked back. The sound of pounding hooves faded into silence until only the wind remained. Clara stood alone beneath the rising sun. One nearly empty canteen. No food. No weapon. Miles from the nearest settlement. As the morning heat began to build, she slowly realized the terrifying truth. The man she had trusted with her future had abandoned her to die in the endless desert. The desert wasted no time reminding Clara Whitmore that it had no sympathy for the weak. By midday, the blazing Arizona sun had transformed the canyon into an oven. The rocky walls that had sheltered her during the cool morning now reflected waves of unbearable heat. Every breath felt like inhaling air from an open furnace, and the tiny amount of water left in her canteen disappeared with a single careful sip. She knew she had to make every drop count, but she also knew it wouldn't be enough. Clara stood alone, staring in the direction Elias Mercer had ridden until he disappeared beyond the horizon. Part of her still hoped he would return. Perhaps guilt would overcome his greed. Perhaps he would realize the terrible mistake he had made. Hours passed. No one came. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind and the distant cries of hawks circling high above, searching for prey. With no better choice, Clara began walking. She followed the faint tracks left by the horses, hoping they might lead her toward water or another traveler. The desert stretched endlessly before her, its beauty hiding its deadly nature. Towering saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels, while scattered mesquite bushes offered little shade. Lizards darted between rocks, disappearing before she could take another step. As the afternoon wore on, her strength faded. Sweat soaked her dress, but soon even that stopped. Her body no longer had enough moisture to spare. Her lips cracked. Her throat burned. Every step became heavier than the last. By sunset, Clara reached a dry wash where she collapsed beneath a small Palo Verde tree. Its thin branches cast only a patch of shade, but it was enough to shield her from the last rays of the sun. She closed her eyes. Images of her old life drifted through her mind. She remembered her father teaching her to read beside the fireplace during cold Missouri winters. She remembered her mother's gentle laugh before illness claimed her years earlier. She remembered believing that kindness was always rewarded, that honest people eventually found happiness. Then she remembered Elias. The promises. The smiles. The dreams he had painted so carefully. Each memory now felt like another betrayal. Tears rolled down her dusty cheeks, disappearing into the dry earth beneath her. "I trusted you," she whispered into the empty desert. Night arrived quickly. The temperature dropped, replacing unbearable heat with an unexpected chill. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, shivering beneath a sky overflowing with stars. Coyotes howled somewhere in the darkness, their eerie cries echoing across the empty landscape. Sleep came only in short, restless moments. When dawn broke, she forced herself to continue walking. The second day proved even harder than the first. Without water, her thoughts became cloudy. The distant mountains shimmered strangely, sometimes appearing close enough to touch before drifting away again. Once, she thought she saw a river sparkling in the distance. She hurried toward it. Minutes later, the water vanished. It had only been another mirage. Exhausted, Clara stumbled over loose rocks and fell hard onto the desert floor. She tried to stand, but her legs refused to obey. "This is how it ends," she whispered. She looked toward the bright blue sky, accepting that she might never leave the desert alive. Suddenly, she heard something. Hoofbeats. At first, she thought she was imagining them. Then came another sound. Voices. They were speaking a language she did not understand. Clara struggled to lift her head. Several riders appeared along a nearby ridge. They moved with remarkable confidence across the rugged terrain, their horses sure-footed among the rocks and cactus. The men wore buckskin clothing and carried bows, rifles, and long spears. Their dark hair moved gently in the desert breeze. For a brief moment, fear gripped Clara. She had heard countless stories about Apache warriors while growing up. Settlers often described them as fierce enemies who attacked without warning. Those tales echoed in her mind as the riders approached. One of the scouts raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. He looked down at Clara carefully. She expected him to draw his weapon. Instead, he slowly dismounted and walked toward her. His expression held caution, but not hatred. He noticed her cracked lips, sunburned skin, and barely conscious state. Speaking softly to his companions, he knelt beside her and offered a small leather water pouch. Clara hesitated. Every warning she had ever heard told her not to trust them. But thirst overcame fear. She accepted the pouch with trembling hands and took only a tiny sip. The cool water felt like life itself. The scout gently stopped her before she could drink too much. One of the older riders nodded approvingly. They understood that someone dying of dehydration had to drink slowly. The scouts exchanged quiet words before carefully lifting Clara onto one of their horses. Though weak, she noticed how respectfully they handled her, making sure she would not fall during the journey. As they rode, Clara drifted in and out of consciousness. Hours later, she awoke to the smell of wood smoke. The riders had brought her to an Apache settlement hidden among cottonwood trees beside a flowing stream, a place invisible from the open desert. Families moved peacefully between traditional wickiups, children laughed as they played, and women prepared meals over cooking fires. It looked nothing like the frightening stories she had been told. An elderly woman hurried forward carrying bundles of fresh herbs. She examined Clara's sunburned skin and gently applied a cool paste made from desert plants. Another woman offered broth while an older man checked her pulse with experienced hands. No one shouted. No one threatened her. They simply worked together to save a stranger's life. Later that evening, Clara was escorted to a larger shelter near the center of the camp. Inside sat an older man whose calm presence commanded respect without a single word. His long gray hair rested neatly over his shoulders, and his deeply lined face reflected years of wisdom rather than anger. His dark eyes studied Clara carefully, not with suspicion, but with quiet understanding. This was Chief Nantan. The scouts explained where they had found her. After listening in silence, the chief looked directly at Clara. "You have traveled through death's doorway," he said in careful English. "Yet the desert chose not to keep you." Clara lowered her eyes. "I owe you my life." Chief Nantan remained silent for a long moment before answering. "No," he said gently. "Life is not something to be owned. It is something to be protected. Those simple words challenged everything Clara thought she knew. The man she had been taught to fear had shown her more mercy in a single day than the man she had trusted with all her heart. The days that followed were unlike anything Clara Whitmore had ever imagined. When she first arrived at the Apache settlement, she believed her stay would last only until she regained enough strength to return to the nearest town. She expected to be treated as an outsider, a guest, perhaps, but never someone who truly belonged. Instead, each sunrise revealed another act of kindness. Every morning, one of the village women brought her warm broth made from rabbit, beans, and wild herbs. An elderly healer named Atsa carefully changed the herbal poultices on Clara's sunburned arms, explaining which desert plants soothed pain and which could save a traveler suffering from dehydration. Although Clara understood only a few words, kindness needed no translation. Within 2 weeks, she was able to walk without assistance. She spent hours sitting beneath the shade of giant cottonwood trees near the stream that flowed beside the village. The cool water reflected the bright blue sky, while children laughed as they splashed along the shallow banks. Their carefree smiles reminded Clara that happiness could exist even after terrible loss. One afternoon, a little girl no older than 7 approached her. She held out a small woven bracelet decorated with tiny blue and white beads. "For you," the girl said shyly in broken English. Clara smiled. "It's beautiful." The child carefully tied the bracelet around Clara's wrist before running back to her friends. Clara stared at the gift for a long moment. It was the first present anyone had given her without expecting something in return. As her strength returned, Clara insisted on helping around the village. At first, the women protested, telling her she needed more rest. But Clara refused to spend her days doing nothing while others cared for her. She gathered firewood. She fetched water from the stream. She helped prepare meals by grinding corn into flour using heavy stone tools. She mended torn blankets with the sewing skills her mother had taught her years before. Though her efforts were simple, the villagers appreciated them. Slowly, suspicious glances were replaced by warm smiles. Not everyone trusted her immediately. Some of the older warriors remembered attacks carried out by settlers who had broken promises and seized Apache lands. To them, Clara's pale skin reminded them of painful memories. One evening, as several warriors sat around a fire repairing their bows, Clara overheard a heated conversation. One younger warrior shook his head. "She is one of them," he said in Apache. "How can we know she will not bring soldiers here?" Chief Nantan, who sat nearby carving a wooden flute, answered calmly. "We judge a person by their actions, not by the color of their skin." The younger man frowned. "But her people have brought us suffering." The chief nodded. "Many have." He placed the carving knife beside him. "But if we answer every act of hatred with more hatred, then hatred becomes our only teacher." Silence settled over the fire. No one argued further. Clara did not understand every word, but she understood enough to realize the chief had defended her. The realization filled her with both gratitude and humility. Several weeks later, Chief Nantan invited Clara to accompany a group gathering edible plants in the surrounding hills. As they walked through the desert, he pointed toward different shrubs and cacti. "This land gives life," he explained. "Most people only see sand." He showed her how prickly pear cactus provided fruit and water, how mesquite beans could be ground into nutritious flour, and how certain desert flowers attracted bees whose honey was carefully collected. "You cannot fight the desert," he said. "You must learn to live with it." Those words stayed with Clara long after they returned to the village. She realized they described more than survival. They described life itself. Over the following months, Clara eagerly learned everything she could. She picked up simple Apache words each day. She learned how to weave baskets from willow branches gathered near the stream. She discovered how hunters followed animal tracks almost invisible to untrained eyes. She watched ceremonies celebrating changing seasons, where songs honored ancestors, family, and the Creator. The traditions were different from those she had known growing up, yet she recognized familiar values. Respect. Gratitude. Courage. Love for family. The more she learned, the more she questioned the stories she had believed as a child. She had been taught that the Apache were little more than fierce warriors. Instead, she found devoted parents, skilled craftsmen, gifted storytellers, and people who laughed, mourned, celebrated, and dreamed just as anyone else did. One evening, while helping prepare dinner, Clara asked an elderly woman named Nalin what made Chief Nantan such a respected leader. Nalin smiled. He listens. Clara looked surprised. That is all. The woman chuckled softly. No. She stirred a pot hanging above the fire. He listens before speaking. He protects before fighting. He forgives when others demand revenge. That is much harder than carrying a weapon. Those words explained what Clara had already begun to see for herself. Chief Nantan never ruled through fear. He earned respect through wisdom. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Elias Mercer lived a very different life. The gold hidden within the canyon had made him wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. He purchased expensive clothing, fine horses, and a large house in a growing frontier town. People admired his sudden success. Few questioned how he had acquired such extraordinary wealth. Yet prosperity brought him no peace. Every unexpected knock at his door made him uneasy. Every unfamiliar traveler caused him to glance over his shoulder. At night, sleep rarely lasted more than a few hours. Whenever he closed his eyes, he heard Clara's desperate voice echoing across the canyon. Please, don't do this. He would wake drenched in sweat. One afternoon, while drinking in a crowded saloon, Elias overheard two traders discussing their recent journey through Apache country. I swear I saw a white woman living with them, one man said. She spoke a little Apache, too. Elias nearly dropped his glass. His face turned pale. A white woman? He asked, trying to sound casual. The trader nodded. Strangest thing I've ever seen. Looked healthy enough. Must have been with them for months. Elias forced a smile, but inside, panic tightened around his heart. Impossible. He had left Clara alone with almost no water. No one could survive that desert. Unless someone had found her. For the first time since discovering the gold, fear became stronger than greed. If Clara was alive, then she knew the truth. She knew where the gold was hidden. She knew he had abandoned her. And sooner or later, she might come looking for justice. Far away, beneath the peaceful shade of the cottonwood trees, Clara had no thoughts of revenge. She sat beside Chief Nantan as children played nearby. Watching them laugh, she realized something she had never expected. The desert had taken away the life she thought she wanted. But in its place, it had given her something far more valuable. Not wealth. Not comfort. A family she had never expected to find. Autumn arrived in the Arizona territory, bringing cooler nights and golden light that stretched across the desert. The scorching summer had faded, but the peace surrounding Chief Nantan's village would not last forever. For nearly 6 months, Clara had lived among the Apache. She no longer felt like a stranger. Each morning, she joined the women gathering mesquite beans and wild herbs. She helped weave baskets, repaired clothing, and taught the village children how to read simple English words by drawing letters in the sand. In return, the children taught her Apache songs and stories passed down through generations. Laughter had returned to her life. The nightmares of being abandoned in the desert came less often now. Whenever fear threatened to overwhelm her, Chief Nantan would remind her, the past cannot be changed, but tomorrow is still waiting. Those words became her source of strength. Yet far beyond the village, another man was losing what little peace he had left. Elias Mercer had everything money could buy. The gold from the hidden canyon had transformed him into one of the wealthiest men in the territory. He owned a large ranch, employed dozens of workers, and entertained influential businessmen who admired his success. But behind the polished smile and expensive suits was a man trapped by his own conscience. Every rumor about a white woman living among the Apache haunted him. At first, he dismissed the stories as frontier gossip. But when another trader described the woman in detail, her light brown hair, the small scar above her left eyebrow, and the blue beaded bracelet she always wore, Elias felt the blood drain from his face. There could be no doubt. Clara was alive. That evening, he locked himself inside his office. He paced back and forth across the wooden floor, trying to convince himself there was nothing to fear. She has no proof, he muttered. No one will believe her. But deep inside, he knew better. Clara knew where the gold had come from. She knew he had abandoned her. If she reached the authorities, everything he had built could disappear. His fortune. His reputation. His freedom. Greed whispered the same cruel solution it had offered months before. Finish what you started. The next morning, Elias rode into the nearest town and entered a rough saloon where hired guns often gathered between jobs. The room fell quiet as he approached a table occupied by 4 armed men. The oldest introduced himself as Victor Kane, a former soldier known for taking dangerous work without asking many questions. "I hear you're looking for men," Victor said. "I need a problem removed," Elias replied. "How much does the problem pay?" Elias placed a heavy leather pouch on the table. Gold coins spilled onto the wood. "Half now," he said. "The rest when the job is finished." Victor raised an eyebrow. "What kind of problem?" Elias leaned closer. "There is a woman living with an Apache village. I want her brought back." He paused before adding coldly. "If that isn't possible, make certain she never speaks again." The 4 men exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a young gunman named Samuel Briggs, frowned. "You didn't say anything about killing a woman." Elias's expression hardened. "I said I want the problem gone." Samuel looked uncomfortable but remained silent. The lure of gold was difficult to ignore. Within days, the group rode toward Apache territory. They traveled carefully, following old trading routes until they reached the hills overlooking Chief Nanton's village. From the ridge, Elias studied the settlement through a spyglass. Children chased one another beside the stream. Women prepared food over cooking fires. Men repaired saddles and tools. He spotted Clara helping an elderly woman carry baskets filled with corn. She looked healthier than he had ever seen her. She smiled as children surrounded her. The sight filled him not with relief, but with anger. "She should have died," he whispered bitterly. Victor lowered the spyglass. "This isn't a military camp," he said. "It's a village." "They're still Apache," Elias replied sharply. "Do the job." Meanwhile, below the ridge, Chief Nanton stood quietly beside the stream. His sharp eyes scanned the distant hills. Years of leading his people had taught him to notice even the smallest changes in the desert. The birds had stopped singing. A herd of deer that normally grazed nearby had suddenly fled north. Even the horses seemed restless. He turned toward one of his most trusted scouts. "We are being watched." The scout nodded immediately. "I felt it too." Without raising alarm, Chief Nanton calmly began preparing the village. He ordered the children, elders, and mothers with infants to leave through a narrow canyon known only to the Apache. Warriors quietly gathered weapons, not for revenge, but for defense. Clara noticed the unusual activity. "What is happening?" she asked. Chief Nanton looked toward the hills. "Sometimes," he answered softly, "the desert warns us before danger arrives." Within an hour, most of the village's vulnerable members had disappeared into the surrounding mountains. Only the warriors remained. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Elias gave the signal. The hired guns rode toward the village with rifles raised. But instead of finding frightened families, they found a line of calm Apache warriors standing silently across the entrance. No one fired. No one shouted. Chief Nantan stepped forward alone. He raised one empty hand. "There is no need for bloodshed," he called in English. Victor slowed his horse. He had expected panic. Instead, he found discipline and restraint. Elias pushed past him. "Where is she?" he demanded. Clara emerged from behind the line of warriors. When her eyes met Elias's, time seemed to stop. Months of pain, betrayal, and heartbreak flashed through her mind. She remembered begging him not to leave. She remembered collapsing beneath the desert sun. She remembered believing she would die alone. Now the man responsible stood before her once again. Elias forced a confident smile. "There you are," he said. "I've been searching everywhere for you." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "You abandoned me." The desert fell silent. Victor slowly turned toward Elias. "What did she say?" Clara took a deep breath. Her voice remained steady. "He left me in the desert without food, without water, and stole everything we had after discovering a gold mine." She pointed directly at Elias. "He expected me to die." The hired guns looked from Clara to Elias. No one spoke. Finally, Samuel Briggs removed his hat. "You told us she ran away," he said quietly. Elias's jaw tightened. "She's lying." "No," Clara replied firmly. "If I were lying, I wouldn't still be alive." Chief Nantan stepped beside her. "This woman was found dying in the desert by my scouts. My people saved her when the desert should have claimed her." Victor looked down at the pouch of gold hanging from his saddle. It suddenly felt heavier than ever. He realized they had not been hired to capture a dangerous fugitive. They had been hired to silence the only witness to a terrible crime. One by one, the hired guns lowered their rifles. For the first time in his life, Elias Mercer found himself completely alone. The greed that had once made him rich had finally cost him the one thing money could never buy. The trust of every man standing beside him. The evening wind swept across the valley, carrying dust through the quiet Apache village. For several long moments, no one moved. Victor Kane and the other hired guns sat frozen on their horses, their rifles lowered. The weight of Clara's words hung in the air like a gathering storm. They had ridden into Apache territory believing they were helping an honest businessman recover a missing woman. Instead, they had discovered they had been deceived by the very man who hired them. Elias Mercer glanced nervously from one face to another. He could see doubt replacing loyalty. Anger replacing obedience. "You fools," he snapped. "Don't listen to her. She's been living with these people for months. Of course she'll say whatever they want." No one answered. Samuel Briggs slowly dismounted from his horse and removed the leather pouch of gold from his belt. Without saying a word, he tossed it onto the ground at Elias's feet. The heavy bag landed with a dull thud, spilling several gold coins into the dust. "I've done hard jobs," Samuel said quietly, "but I don't murder innocent women." Victor followed. "So have I." He dropped his own payment beside Samuel's. "I was a soldier once. I've seen enough men destroyed by greed." One by one, the remaining hired guns returned every coin Elias had paid them. Within minutes, the fortune that had purchased their loyalty lay scattered across the desert floor. Elias stared in disbelief. "You can't walk away." "We already have," Victor replied. Without another word, the four men turned their horses and rode away, disappearing into the fading sunlight. For the first time since discovering the hidden gold, Elias stood completely alone. His face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this," he shouted. No one answered. Realizing he had lost every ally, Elias spun his horse around and galloped toward the open desert. A cloud of dust followed him as he disappeared over the nearest ridge. Several young Apache warriors immediately reached for their weapons. "We can catch him before sunset," one said. "He deserves punishment." Another nodded. "He left our guest to die." Chief Nantan raised one hand. The warriors stopped instantly. "There will be no killing." The younger men looked confused. "He escaped," one protested. "He will return." Chief Nantan looked toward the distant horizon. "A man who is ruled by greed always returns to the thing he values most." Clara stepped beside him. "What do you mean?" "The gold. He believes it belongs to him." The chief smiled gently. "He cannot stay away." The following morning, Chief Nantan gathered 3 experienced trackers and asked Clara to accompany them. "We are not hunting a man," he explained. "We are following the path his choices have created." The small group left before sunrise. The trackers moved silently across the desert, reading signs that Clara could barely see. A broken cactus spine. Fresh horseshoe prints pressed into the sand. A snapped mesquite branch. Every mark told a story. "He is pushing the horse too hard," one tracker observed. "He is frightened." By midday, they found the first proof. Elias's exhausted horse stood beneath a rocky ledge, trembling with fatigue. The saddle had been abandoned. "He continues on foot," another tracker said. "He believes no one can follow him." Chief Nantan quietly nodded. "The desert is patient." They continued across dry washes and narrow canyons until the familiar cliffs of the hidden Gold Canyon appeared in the distance. Clara immediately recognized the place. This was where her life had nearly ended. Her heartbeat quickened. She remembered Elias's smile when he discovered the gold. She remembered his cold eyes as he rode away. She remembered begging for mercy. Now she stood in the very place where hope had once disappeared. Inside the canyon, Elias worked feverishly. Driven by panic, he had filled several heavy sacks with chunks of gold-bearing rock. His hands were bleeding from swinging the pickaxe without rest. He muttered to himself as he worked. "Just one more bag. Then I'll disappear. No one will ever find me." He ignored the warning signs around him. Dark clouds gathered over the distant mountains. A strong wind began rushing through the canyon. Chief Nantan stopped at the entrance. He looked toward the sky. "The mountain is speaking." Almost immediately, thunder echoed across the desert. A sudden flash flood burst through the narrow canyon. A roaring wall of muddy water rushed between the towering cliffs with incredible force. Elias looked up too late. The flood slammed into him, knocking the sacks of gold from his hands. He scrambled onto a large boulder as the raging water swept away his tools, supplies, and precious treasure. "Help!" he screamed. "Someone help me!" The flood trapped him on the isolated rock while powerful currents surged around him. From the canyon entrance, Clara watched in stunned silence. Months earlier, she had cried those very same words. No one had answered. Now the man who had abandoned her faced the same terrifying helplessness. One of the Apache warriors looked at Chief Nantan. "We should leave. The desert has chosen." Another warrior agreed. "He showed no mercy. Why should he receive any?" Chief Nantan remained silent. Then he turned toward Clara. "The choice belongs to you." Every eye shifted toward her. Clara looked at Elias. He was terrified. His expensive clothes were soaked. The proud, confident man who had once believed himself untouchable now clung desperately to the slippery rock, his face filled with fear. He looked nothing like the man who had ridden away without a backward glance. "Elias!" Clara called. He looked up. His voice cracked. "Please. I'm sorry. Save me." Clara closed her eyes. Painful memories rushed through her mind. The endless heat. The empty canteen. The loneliness. The betrayal. For a long moment, she said nothing. Finally, she turned to Chief Nantan. You saved my life when you owed me nothing. She looked back at Elias. If I leave him here to die, I become the person he believed I was. Chief Nantan smiled with quiet pride. You have learned well. Using ropes woven from strong desert fibers, the Apache warriors carefully reached Elias and pulled him from the boulder before the floodwaters rose again. The moment he reached solid ground, Elias collapsed. He expected anger. He expected punishment. Instead, he received something far more difficult to face. Mercy. Unable to meet Clara's eyes, he whispered, "Why?" Clara answered calmly. "Because someone once showed mercy to me." She glanced at Chief Nantan. "And that changed my life forever." As the storm clouds drifted away, the hidden gold canyon stood nearly empty. The flood had carried away most of Elias's treasure, scattering it deep into the desert where no one would ever recover it. The wealth he had sacrificed everything to protect was gone. All that remained were his crimes, and the judgment that awaited him beyond the desert. The storm had passed, leaving the desert washed clean. Golden rays of morning sunlight stretched across the canyon, illuminating the towering cliffs where Elias Mercer had once believed he would build a fortune. The raging flood had vanished as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind scattered branches, smooth stones, and deep channels carved into the earth. The sacks of gold Elias had risked everything to protect were gone. Some had been swept into narrow crevices beyond reach. Others had disappeared beneath layers of mud and sand, buried by the force of the flood. The canyon that had once promised endless wealth now stood silent, as if the desert itself had erased every trace of his greed. Elias sat on the ground with his head lowered. His soaked clothes clung to his body, and his hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the crushing weight of everything he had lost. For the first time in many months, he looked like an ordinary man instead of a wealthy businessman. His expensive boots were ruined. His fine coat was torn. The confidence that had once filled his voice had disappeared. Chief Nantan stood nearby, watching quietly. There are two kinds of people, the chief said after a long silence. Those who spend their lives collecting treasures. He looked toward the empty canyon. And those who spend their lives protecting people. Elias could not lift his eyes. I understand now, he whispered. Chief Nantan gently shook his head. No. You understand loss. Understanding comes when your actions change. Those words settled heavily in Elias's heart. Without another word, the group began the journey back toward the nearest territorial settlement. Two Apache warriors rode beside Elias to ensure he did not escape. Clara walked several steps behind them, her thoughts drifting between the woman she had once been and the person she had become. Months earlier, she would have celebrated seeing Elias in chains. Now she felt something different. Not joy. Not hatred. Only peace. She had survived. She had found a family. She no longer needed revenge to heal the wounds of the past. After 2 days of travel, they arrived at the small frontier town of Red Creek. The dusty streets buzzed with activity as merchants opened their stores and ranchers gathered outside the general store. Curious townspeople stopped what they were doing when they saw an Apache chief walking calmly beside a white woman, escorting a wealthy businessman with his hands bound. The unusual sight quickly drew a crowd. The town sheriff, an experienced lawman named Thomas Caldwell, stepped out of his office. What happened here? He asked. Clara took a deep breath. Then, for the first time, she told her story publicly. She described how Elias had promised her marriage and a new life. She explained how they had discovered the hidden gold. She told everyone how he had stolen the horses, the food, and the water before abandoning her to die beneath the desert sun. Finally, she explained how Apache scouts had rescued her and how Chief Nantan's people had cared for her when they owed her nothing. The street fell silent. Many of the townspeople lowered their heads in shame. For years, they had believed stories that painted the Apache as cruel enemies. Yet the truth standing before them told a very different story. The people who had been feared had shown compassion. The man who had been admired had committed betrayal. Sheriff Caldwell turned toward Elias. "Do you deny any of this?" For several long moments, Elias said nothing. His shoulders slumped. Finally, he spoke. "No." The single word echoed through the quiet street. "I did it." Gasps spread through the crowd. "I left her there because I wanted the gold for myself. I thought no one would ever know." Sheriff Caldwell removed a pair of iron handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, theft, and fraud." As the handcuffs closed around Elias's wrists, he looked toward Clara one last time. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said softly. "I know." Clara's voice was calm. "But I hope one day you become a man who would never make the same choice again." Elias nodded silently as the sheriff led him away. Weeks later, news of the trial spread throughout the territory. Witnesses testified about Elias's sudden wealth, his false claims, and Clara's miraculous rescue. The hired guns admitted they had been paid to silence her. Even Victor Kane returned to tell the court how Elias had tried to hire them for murder. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the jury found Elias guilty on every charge. His fortune was confiscated, his reputation destroyed, and he was sentenced to many years in prison. Justice had finally been served. But for Clara, the trial was never the greatest victory. The greatest victory had happened long before, beside a quiet stream in an Apache village, where strangers had chosen kindness over suspicion. As winter approached, Clara returned to Chief Nanton's people. This time, she came not as someone seeking refuge, but as someone coming home. The children ran to greet her with joyful laughter. The elders welcomed her warmly. The women embraced her like a daughter who had been away too long. One evening, as everyone gathered around a large campfire beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars, Chief Nanton stood before the village. "Our people have always believed," he said, "that every life touches another." He looked at Clara. "When we found her in the desert, we believed we were saving one life." He smiled. "We did not know she would change ours as well." The villagers nodded in agreement. Over the following years, Clara devoted herself to building understanding between settlers and the Apache. She learned both languages fluently and often served as a translator during peaceful meetings. She encouraged honest trade, helped resolve misunderstandings, and reminded both communities that fear often grows from ignorance. Slowly, trust began replacing suspicion. Not everywhere. Not with everyone. But enough to make a difference. Many years later, after Chief Nanton had grown old, children often gathered around Clara to hear the story of how she had survived the desert. They always expected her to talk about courage. Instead, she spoke about compassion. She would point toward the distant mountains and say, "I thought the desert was where my life ended. But it was actually where my real life began." She always ended with the same lesson. "A cruel man left me behind because he believed greed was stronger than love. A wise chief saved me because he knew mercy was stronger than hatred. One man tried to take my future. The other gave it back." And that was the lesson the children carried into adulthood, that a single act of compassion could change one person's destiny, heal old wounds, and leave a legacy that would be remembered long after gold had turned to dust. For in the end, people did not remember Elias Mercer for the fortune he chased. They remembered Chief Nanton for the life he chose to save. And that choice changed everything forever.